This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Let's take a look at what happened on the markets today. Global stocks were mixed in trade today, mostly towards positive territory, though. Some of that market optimism is being reported to be fueled by rising consumer demand as more and more economies reopen. Here in Africa, the JSE All Share ticked up almost 0.6%. Egypt's markets also closed in the green. However, the largest economies in East and West Africa both saw a dive in their indices. Let's now take a look at other stories making headlines. Chinese President Xi Jinping makes a key address as Davos Agenda 2022 opens. Tanzania and Burundi sign a $900 million trade-linked deal. And key data shows economic momentum in China remains sound in 2021. It's been more than 2 years since the start of the COVID outbreak, and the world's post-COVID recovery is set to top the agenda as leaders convene for the World Economic Forum's Davos 2022. It's the first global platform this year aimed at providing an opportunity for key heads of state and government, along with leaders from civil society, to reflect on the state of the world, as well as shape solutions for critical challenges that still lie ahead. Leaders say radically different COVID experiences have exacerbated global divisions. Meanwhile, vaccine inequities combined with new strains are reported to be slowing international economic recovery. However, as the Global Risks Report 2022 states, the impact of COVID-19 is only one of the critical global challenges which could become unmanageable unless world leaders prioritize proactive collaboration. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the meeting on Monday. He called for unity in the face of COVID-19.
Thanks to the concerted efforts of the international community, major progress has been made in the global fight against the pandemic. That said, the pandemic is proving a protracted one, resurging with more variants and spreading faster than before. It poses a serious threat to people's safety and health and exerts a profound impact on the global economy. Strong confidence and cooperation represent the only right way to defeat the pandemic.
Xi Jinping also called on the world to move forward by following the logic of historical progress and riding the tide of development. He said the world was developing through the movement of contradictions, and the history of humanity was a history of achieving growth by meeting tests and overcoming crises. President Xi also said that economic globalization was a trend of our times and countries should stick to true multilateralism.
Countries around the world should uphold true multilateralism. We should remove barriers, not erect walls. We should open up, not close off. We should seek integration, not decoupling. This is the way to build an open world economy. We should guide reforms of the global governance system with the principle of fairness and justice, and uphold the multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its center. We should make generally acceptable and effective rules for artificial intelligence and digital economy on the basis of full consultation, and create an open, just, and non-discriminatory environment for scientific and technological innovation. This is the way to make economic globalization more open, inclusive, balanced, and beneficial for all, and to fully unleash the vitality of the world economy.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has said there is a need for further opening up of the world economy as well as greater cooperation. President Xi noted that the world needed to explore new drivers of economic growth to promote steady and robust global economic recovery. It is a view echoed by a section of economists who say Africa would benefit from responsible economic policies. Global Chairman for the Fairfax Africa Fund, Zemedina Negatu, gave us his insights on the impact of the opening up of the global economy as championed by President Xi Jinping.
I think that President Xi Jinping's thinking is we need to re-engage more effectively because globalization has benefited millions, if not billions of people around the world. I think Africa is on the cusp of transforming from a commodity-dependent economy, hopefully in the next decade or so, to a value-added. And for Africa to benefit from that transformation, it will need an open global trading system that doesn't favor one side or the other, but plays by the rule of the game that was set up in the last decade or so. So his message, I think, resonates with many in the developed world. I think the $40 billion commitment made at FOCAC a month ago, that's excellent initiative. I would urge the US and Europe to follow up on that. I think the 40 billion of investments and financing over the next 3 years, because what Africa needs actually more than aid right now is FDI and financial support to accelerate the growth, the transformation of Africa. Okay, those kinds of initiatives, I think, will help. The key point here is we're in it together.
The World Economic Forum is urging global leaders to come together and adopt a coordinated, multi-stakeholder approach to tackle unrelenting global challenges. The forum says the approach should include building resilience in preparation for future crises. According to WEF, such cooperation is essential for economies to recover from the effects of COVID, as well as reduced greenhouse gases. Here's more on that story.
Only 1 in 10 World Economic Forum members surveyed expects the global recovery to accelerate over the next 3 years. A poll of nearly 1,000 business, government, and academic leaders also found only 1 in 6 optimistic about the world outlook. Erosion of social cohesion, livelihood crisis, and mental health deterioration were identified as risks which had increased the most since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's certainly not the only place in which governments are having to manage a jobs crisis and to deal with the fallout from the pandemic. So, for example, mental health crises were among the top 5 areas that worsened over the course of these last 2 years. 53 million additional cases of depression alone because of the pandemic. So there's a number of other factors in the short term that I think governments are having to balance against the green transition, which is clearly one of the major issues that has to be dealt with.
Agreement at the UN COP26 climate conference in November last year was widely applauded for keeping alive prospects of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, many of the nearly 200 nations had wanted to leave the conference in Glasgow with more. Climate change is already seen contributing to more extreme weather patterns, and failure to act on it could shrink global GDP by 1/6, and the commitments taken at COP26 are still not enough to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal.
The Global Risk Report highlights that in the next 5 to 10 years, climate action failure and the environmental risk it brings, namely extreme weather events, are perceived to be the most critical long-term threats to the world. One of the important long-term consequences of the pandemic is the effect it will have on the world's ability to address these important global environmental challenges, reducing the attention and focus needed for governments to take effective and quick climate action, halving greenhouse gas emissions in the next decade and achieving the net zero transition by 2050.
And welcome to this press conference.
The WEF's report also highlights 4 areas of emerging risk: cybersecurity, a disorderly climate transition, migration pressures, and competition in space. The prospect of 70,000 satellite launches in coming decades, in addition to space tourism, raises risks of collisions and increasing debris in space amid a lack of regulation. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, for more on some of the pertinent issues being discussed at this year's World Economic Forum, earlier we spoke with the forum's head of Africa Division, Mr. Chido Munyati. I began by asking him about some of the long-term risks expected to be discussed regarding the global economic recovery at this year's WEF, focus on the post-COVID economic transition.
So today, the Davos Agenda Dialogues commenced. This is a series of dialogues that include global heads of state, including Xi Jinping of China, Prime Minister Modi of India, as well as Chancellor Scholz from Germany, as well as VP Osinbajo from Nigeria. So getting to your question in terms of, what are some of the global risks that we see? I think the primary risk that we see, and this is going to be discussed throughout the week, is a challenge around the global the divergence in the global economic recovery, particularly a decoupling between the haves and the have-not. So on one hand, you have 70% of the populations of wealthier countries that have been fully vaccinated, able to engage in commerce and trade. And on the other hand, we have African countries where less than 10% of the population has been fully vaccinated. This in turn is having a negative impact both on the economy and on health systems. So the issue of vaccine equity or equitable allocation of vaccines, if this is not addressed in the short term, we will see a compounding of sort of global inequality.
And I was reading a report that was saying just that earlier on today. But Chido, what do you expect some of the key issues leaders from Africa, I mean, I'm sure they're going to raise this very issue that you've spoken about, but what other issues, both from business and from the government, do you expect to be raised at this forum from African leaders?
I think other issues that we can expect to be raised during this week from African leaders, I think one is a bucket of issues related to social cohesion. So this is employment and livelihood. So tying back to what I just said, if African economies don't get equitable access to vaccines, we're going to be stuck in this perpetual stop and go momentum of opening and closing our economies. This in turn will have a negative impact on the fiscal position of our economies, as well as impacting small to medium-sized enterprises. As you well know, SMEs are the backbone of the African economy. They employ as much as 80% of the African workforce. So the viability of these SMEs is directly correlated to Africa's ability to drive a sustainable economic recovery. I'll say about two other bigger issues will be addressed throughout the week. One is related to digital transformation. As you've seen over the last 18 months, we've become more dependent on these digital systems. And this is really in a context where in many African countries, as much as 70% of the population is simply just offline, they're not connected. So questions around how we can ensure that digital infrastructure, broadband internet is reaching that final mile, particularly to people in rural areas. And at the World Economic Forum, we have an initiative called the Edison Alliance, whereby we're working on a private-public partnership to ensure that we advance issues related to digital inclusion. The next sort of big issue that we'll see discussed and interwoven to all of our conversations is the climate issue. And I think in the African context, primarily focusing on the issue around extreme weather conditions. We're starting to see the impact of this, particularly in Western Africa and the Sahel region, where we're seeing communities of farmers and herders being displaced by extreme weather conditions, being forced into involuntary migration. So I think these are like the big sort of top line issues that we expect to see addressed by both global participants as well as participants from the region throughout the week.
Chido, I want to talk about supply chains. We know that those were really hard hit in various countries around the world, and that issue of supply chains not at full capacity yet, being still top of mind for business leaders around the world. How does the forum work with governments and businesses on such issues? And particularly, let's talk about, you were talking about that digital transformation and how that would translate, particularly here on the African continent.
Yeah, so I think the issue of global supply chains, there's no sort of easy fix because this is a complex sort of interwoven interaction between different economies and businesses and borders. But from the African perspective, I think what we see is that, last year, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement went into effect. This is the largest free trade area by number of people, so 1.2 billion people, a GDP of 3.4 trillion. So effectively implementing this will make Africa as a continent less dependent on some of these disruptions that we see globally. Importantly, this will provide us with the necessary stimulus to stimulate our economies in sort of the medium to long term, and more importantly, provide the jobs necessary for our fast-growing population. The good story in Africa is that our potential remains undiminished. Over the next 3 decades, we expect the global population to grow by about 2 billion people. And of those 2 billion people, 1 billion are going to come from Africa. So we have the fastest growing working age population in the world, which will provide us with a strong base to build highly productive, high growth economies. So as it relates to sort of this bigger issue of trade supply constraints and some of the challenges we see, I think as the African continent, if this year we focus on ensuring that the remaining parts of the agreement that need to be negotiated in order to lead to full implementation are addressed, that will go a long way to sort of benefiting the continent.
Well, Southern Africa is set for an economic rebound. According to the African Development Bank's outlook, the region is forecast to have grown by 3.2% in 2021 and is expected to grow by 2.4% this year. It's a solid bounce back from the 6.3% decline suffered in 2020, largely due to COVID. While the virus is still a threat, the severity of its spread and impact has lessened. Businesses in South Africa, for instance, say that they're feeling a lot more optimistic about an economic rebound. Small businesses were particularly hard hit during the pandemic, with hundreds having to close. But as Sumitra Naidu reports, some businesses weathered the storm and have come back stronger.
Matthias Mati is living his dream. He produces bespoke leather accessories for local and international fashion houses.
I started off for the first 5 years. I actually worked from my mother's garage, and through trial and error, dismally failing a few times, might I add, and also wasting a lot of money on materials. And then I got an opportunity to go and do an apprenticeship in Berlin, in Germany. I then assisted them with production for Berlin and Paris Fashion Week. And the experience and the knowledge that I picked up in Berlin really catapulted me to the next level and to the next stage of my craft.
But Mati candidly admits that COVID almost destroyed what he had built.
It was an absolute nightmare. I don't think anybody could have prepared themselves for what had happened with the pandemic, especially as a creative, especially as an entrepreneur running a small conceptual atelier. I am in the luxury accessory industry, and I think people started cutting budget because luxury was no more a concern. It was more about trying to put food down on the table. Literally during level 5 lockdown, I had no work for 4 months. I had no access to materials. I had no access to any form of supplier whatsoever.
In a fight for survival, Mati pulled through the worst and is back to business as usual.
As a creative and as somebody that works in the luxury sphere, South Africans have really had to bite the bullet, and we've had to push through, and I think we are very resourceful. But for the next year ahead, I'm very optimistic in the sense that we don't have a severe lockdown anymore. We don't have as many restrictions that we did.
It's been a tough 2 years for Matthias, especially because his business services a very niche clientele. But with markets reopening, he is feeling a lot more optimistic about the year ahead.
Our borders have started opening up. We are able to go to fashion shows. We are able to go out to restaurants. We are able to go out to functions. And let's face it, you're not going to wear a leather bag around the house. It is very much an image-based industry that I'm in. And I'm very optimistic in the sense that I have obtained a few good orders.
So many other business owners are echoing similar sentiments and are hoping the worst of COVID is in the past. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, in tonight's corporate headlines, Dutch energy giant Vitol has progressed its bid to buy out shareholders in JSE-listed Viva Energy, which distributes Shell and Engine branded fuels and lubricants in Africa. Vitol has also obtained key approval from the South African Reserve Bank. Little has formed a subsidiary named Bidco to act as an investment vehicle for the $2.3 billion cash deal to acquire all of the Vito shares it does not already own. Macquarie General shareholders have enjoyed a $6.5 million gain in paper wealth at the Nairobi Securities Exchange on heavy demand for its shares amid a limited supply following the announcement of a 0.02 per share dividend for the year ended September 2021. The shares closed at a 6.5-year high of $0.43 last week, a gain of 60.8% from the $0.26 it traded at ahead of the release of its financial results. CNG's market capitalization has now gone up to $15.8 million. Unilever has signaled that it would pursue a deal for GlaxoSmithKline's consumer healthcare business, calling it a strong strategic fit after its $68.4 billion offer was rebuffed, sending its shares down 6%. GSK confirmed over the weekend that it had rejected the Dove soap maker's bid for the business, which is home to brands such as Sensodyne toothpaste, Emergen-C vitamin supplement, and Panado painkiller. And finally, Credit Suisse will stick to its strategic overhaul despite the abrupt departure of its mastermind, Antonio Horta Osorio. Horta Osorio left his post of chairman following an internal probe into his personal conduct, including breaches of COVID-19 rules. Horta Osorio leaves less than a year after he was hired to help the bank deal with the implosion of collapsed investment firm Archegos and the insolvency of British supply chain finance company Greensill Capital. Let's now take a short break and return. Here's what's coming up on Global Biz. Tanzania and Burundi sign a $900 million train link deal. And oil production in Libya peaks to 1 million barrels per day.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
within clear view of this front line position.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business Africa. Well, Tanzania and Burundi have signed an agreement to construct a $900 million railway line that would link the two countries. According to Tanzania's finance ministry, both countries are looking for financial backers for the project. The 282-kilometer line is the latest step towards Tanzania's goal of building a 2,561-kilometer railway network in its bid to boost regional trade. Once completed, the rail network is expected to ferry more than 1 million tons of cargo between the two East African countries. It's also projected that more than 3 million tons of minerals would be transported from Burundi to Tanzania each year. Well, Libya's oil production has recovered to 1 million barrels a day after militia ended a 3-week blockade of several western fields. The move comes after the government reached a deal with paramilitary force known as the Petroleum Facilities Guard. As Yasser Hakim now reports, oil exports account for 95% of Libya's revenue and 65% of its GDP.
The Libyan government's ability to end the blockade by militias on the major oil fields has paved the way for production to reach 1 million barrels per day, up from about 650,000. However, it's still well below expectations.
Since 2011, Libyan oil output significantly dropped. Our peak capacity should be 1.3 billion barrels per day, and according to OPEC, should reach 1.6 million and 2 million later. But we are unable due to the war. 300,000 barrels of production are for the local market and 9,000 for exports.
Libya has the largest oil reserves in Africa, estimated at 40 billion barrels, and with a population of only 7 million people, should have been one of the richest in the continent. However, the infighting between political powers and corruption have prevented the people from benefiting from the abundance of wealth.
Libya's oil revenue distribution is the same since 2011. It's in the hands of the central government in Tripoli, and there are constant calls to amend the law to have a fair distribution, putting in account the cities that produce oil in the south and east. They don't receive enough money for development purposes or to improve the dire living conditions in these areas compared to the west like Tripoli, who receive the largest share of income.
Now that the oil output is gradually increasing, experts like Ammar are proposing to redistribute the oil revenue. A third for the population, salaries and social services, a third to overhaul the rundown oil facilities and infrastructure damaged by the war, and a third for economic reforms. In spite of the latest breakthrough, experts say there will be a repeat of tensions and blockades on oil facilities. Oil output will only be restored unless security is stabilized and free and fair elections take place in Libya. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The International Monetary Fund's outgoing country chief for Tunisia says the country's crisis-stricken economy needs deep reforms. Jerome Vatcher's remarks come as Tunisia seeks a new IMF bailout. Authorities say they are optimistic about reaching a deal by the end of this quarter. However, according to Vatcher, discussions are still in an early stage. The IMF says that it first wants to understand what the government is planning in terms of economic reform. A deal with the global lender could entail politically painful reforms for Tunisia, such as cutting subsidies on basic goods or tackling the wage bill of a public sector that employs some 680,000 of the country's 12 million inhabitants.
The economic situation in Tunisia is difficult. Like many countries, it was aggravated by the COVID-19 crisis, and Tunisia has seen its worst recession since independence. The country had pre-existing problems, in particular budget deficits and public debt, which have worsened in recent years. External deficits have also been persistent in previous years, and above all, growth has been weak and largely insufficient. In our opinion, it's an economy that needs very deep structural reforms, especially to improve the business environment. But it also requires a correction of macroeconomic imbalance, an imbalance of the budgetary situation, and a deep reform of public enterprises.
Over in West Africa, Nigeria's movie industry doubled ticket sales in 2021 as it emerged stronger from the impact of COVID. And as CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam reports, analysts expect the rapidly growing middle class in Nigeria to help its film industry to post an even better performance this year.
The Silverbird Cinema in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, is a hub for entertainment. And it's a favorite spot for movie enthusiast Anita Eloha, who doesn't miss a week. She's now catching up on lost times at the peak of COVID-19 when cinemas were shut down.
It has been exhilarating. At least I can come here and have fun most of the times with my friends and also other people. So I'm very, very happy that the cinema has been opened again.
Nigeria's cinema industry suffered a major shortfall in 2020, an impact of the COVID-19 lockdown. But it made a strong comeback in 2021 as weekend movie ticket sales hit $5.79 million from $2.89 million in 2020. Operators say good content, technology upgrade, and adherence to safety protocols helped in boosting customers' confidence.
It was mostly due to having producers produce more films. We have put in safety measures, all over the world. In the cinema sector, you will not find any case of, no COVID cases traced to the cinema. Do you understand? So that has helped us as a business.
Many see people returning to the cinemas as a good sign for economic recovery, one that should be sustained.
We're confident as long as we have good content, it can only get better. And we, as much as possible, will have to run with the time.
We need to ensure that anything that may affect the cinema industry adversely should be avoided in order for us to continue growing that sector, in order for us to sustain the jobs. I advocate that people should just move about their businesses, but then have to protect themselves in order for us to not to kill and distort the flow of the economy.
Nigeria's film sector contributes 2.3% to the country's GDP, with a nation driven by growing middle class, increased investments in movie production, and millennials who've come to embrace the cinema culture. Industry players are optimistic that the sector is on the right path to recovery and could experience a boom in 2022. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Uganda Airlines is moving to expand its cargo operations in a bid to become more competitive in the airline industry. The company faces stiff competition from regional rivals, even as it struggles to deal with the impact of ongoing COVID-19 restrictions. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
Taking to the skies with a new strategy. Uganda Airlines believes expanding its cargo carrying capacity could help boost its income.
We want also to build our cargo operations so that we can leverage on these long-haul flights. If we can take our agricultural products to London, to China, to Guangzhou, to different corners of the world, so that our people can earn, so that we can get the revenue that we need, and then we can even grow our fleet. I think for right now, that is the immediate action that we are looking at.
The change in strategy follows stiff competition from rival airlines. Kenya Airways and South African Airways have signed a cooperation agreement in a bid to become more competitive.
The problem with Uganda is the airlines that it is going to face is that you are competing with two companies which are private owned and which are, again, in terms of fleet, in terms of experience, in terms of also, because the private sector has come in, they are going to inject more resources. And in terms of airport capacity, these are very efficient companies in terms of those parameters.
But Uganda Airlines says it's focused on its plan to remain a key player in the business.
What we have to do is to just stick to our strategy. And that means that we embarked on establishing new routes, and that's where our energy will be focused. We'll focus on London, Mumbai, Guangzhou, and so many other, Middle East, our interlines coming up, our partnerships, strategic partnerships.
Uganda Airlines has recently faced travel restrictions to Dubai due to a surge in COVID-19 cases arriving from Entebbe. But the ban has since been lifted, and the airline is now making sure that all passengers take 2 mandatory COVID-19 tests prior to their travel.
The vigilance our team has to make sure that every passenger on board is negative. And when we're on board, we're also masking up, sanitizing, and we make sure that at least we deliver a passenger who's negative.
With the new adjustments, Uganda Airlines hopes to spread its wings to new destinations.
The pandemic has had a devastating impact on airlines across the world, but the resumption of flights to the Middle East provides some good news for Uganda Airlines in what remains a difficult time for the industry. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Time for a short break. Here's what's still to come. Key data shows economic momentum in China remains sound in 2021. And UK and India open trade talks to bolster bilateral ties following Brexit.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
Well, let's recap other headlines, other news making headlines. Sudanese security forces have reportedly opened fire on protesters, killing at least 3 people and wounding several. This has brought the total death toll from the protests to at least 67 people. The fatalities are likely to further complicate UN efforts to find a way out of the ongoing crisis. The UN and Western governments have widely condemned the crackdown on protesters. Mali says that it plans to seek to overturn sanctions imposed by the West African Economic Bloc ECOWAS in an international court. In an interview broadcast over the weekend, Mali's interim Prime Minister Choguel Kokala Maiga described the sanctions as illegal. The government is formulating a strategy that will see the country challenge the embargoes in an international court. Leaders from the ECOWAS agreed to sanction Mali earlier this month over Mali's junta, which continued to stay in power, and the delays to hold elections. Well, Algerian Foreign Minister Ramtane Lamara and UN Libya envoy Stephanie Williams have visited Egypt and held talks in Cairo with the country's foreign minister and the Secretary General of the Arab League about developments in Libya. Cairo is concerned about the delay in holding Libya's elections. It is trying to coordinate efforts with international powers to help the North African nation pick its new government through the polls. Well, those were the stories that we were recapping that were making headlines this hour. Well, data released by the National Bureau of Statistics on Monday show that China has been maintaining a steady economic momentum. Reporter Zhu Zhu has more.
According to the National Bureau of Statistics, China's gross domestic product, or GDP, exceeded 110 trillion yuan, or about $17 trillion last year, up 8.1% on a yearly basis. During the fourth quarter of last year, the GDP expanded 4% year-on-year. Ning Zijie, head of the National Bureau of Statistics, says that high-quality development saw a steady uptrend as measures to stabilize the economy during the pandemic bore fruit.
科学统筹疫情防控和经济社会发展
China has coordinated the work of pandemic control and economic and social development scientifically. It has consolidated the work in stabilizing employment, finance, foreign trade and investment, domestic investment and market expectations. New strides have also been taken for building a new development pattern along with achievements in high-quality development, kicking off a good start for the 14th five-year plan.
The NBS says that the major tasks of economic and social development have achieved fruitful results. China's job market remained stable last year. Surveyed unemployment rate in urban areas stood at 5.1%, 0.5 percentage point lower than the average in the previous year. About 13 million new jobs were created in urban areas, around 1 million higher than the previous year. In terms of industries, the value-added component of the primary industry rose by 7.1% on a yearly basis, while secondary and tertiary industries saw gains of 8.2% each on a yearly basis.
The total value added of industrial enterprises above a designated size increased by 9.6% on a yearly basis, a biannual growth of 6.1%. In terms of sectors, the value added for mining rose by 5.3%, manufacturing by 9.8%, and production and supply of electricity, thermal power, gas, and water by 11.4%.
Although the data have met expectations, Ninzija reminded that there are still uncertainties amid the changing pandemic situations and the external environment. He says the country will take further measures to consolidate its economic growth. Zhuzhu, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, consumption now contributes to over 60% of Chinese economic growth. Earlier, Michelle van der Berg visited a shopping center in Beijing to see what the consumption environment was like now as China continues to recover from the impact of COVID-19.
We're at an outdoor shopping mall in the center of Beijing, and it's around 11 o'clock in the morning on a regular Saturday. And as you can see, like we say in Chinese, it's already mountain people, mountain sea. So let's go ahead and check out what has consumption been like in China post-pandemic. Come with me.
Well, I saw the statistics on it coming out of the National Bureau of Statistics, and so retail sales are up like 15%, and everybody's talking about revenge consumption and all that. So we're certainly contributing to that today, and it's busy here today. So I think consumption's doing just fine.
It looks back to normal. It looks like there's, because we're in China and not in other countries, and COVID is not really not bad right now, so it just feels like there's no problem and it's just back to normal.
I'm here to have lunch with my girlfriend. For me, there's not much of a change in my consumption behavior. I wouldn't be walking around in crowded places all the time, but I still eat out and shop.
The growth of winter sports has been pretty robust in recent years, and there are a lot more customers this year than last year. We have a limit of 45 people in the rink at the same time, and the waiting line is about 40 meters long.
Many people also mentioned that more customers prefer domestic brands and like to shop in stores rather than online.
I think because we don't have many chances to shop overseas anymore, so we shop more in China, and we also noticed more our domestic brands when I shop in China. I also shop less and less online. I like going to stores.
Before pandemic, Chinese people are used to travel to overseas. I think especially in big cities, but right now no one can go overseas. Even you have so much money, but right now you have to stay in China. You have to spend domestically.
We have a lot of foot traffic actually. People are really loving China right now, and also Chinese brands. They can't travel overseas, so they like to buy here more.
Consumption and retail sales is an important gauge of a country's economic recovery. China has pledged to focus on consumption recovery in the new year and extend some favorable income tax policies to ease the burden for middle and low-income groups. Michelle Vandenberg, CGTN, Beijing.
Britain and India formally launched free trade talks in Delhi. Officials say they're seeking freer movement of goods and people, with a deal projected to dramatically increase trade between the two countries. The UK has made the deal a priority as the country reels from post-Brexit uncertainties. Radhika Bajaj has more from Mumbai.
What both sides are looking for from this deal is easier access to customers and businesses on the other side, with reduced customs duties and more relaxed trading norms. According to the UK, trade between India and itself stood at about $31.6 billion in 2019, and the UK is hopeful that if this deal goes through, that figure can be doubled by the end of this decade. It was quite clear that both sides are eager to finalize this deal soon, and how they're intending to do that is to first deliberate on areas where there are minimum disagreements, and those would then take a shape of an early harvest or an interim agreement which they want to put into force within the next few months, and the final more substantial agreement is hopefully going to be signed by the end of this year. So that's a very ambitious deadline and timeline that the two sides have set. Now for the UK, this deal will basically set its strategy, trade strategy in the Indo-Pacific in a post-Brexit world. So some may argue that this deal holds more importance for the UK than for India, that has focused on its domestic economy with the Make in India campaign, which has been Prime Minister Narendra Modi's flagship policy. Now we have seen Indian investments into the UK generating jobs up to the tune of 95,000, and the UK is hoping that number can be increased. The UK is also seeking lower customs duties on products like Scotch whisky or even British manufactured cars, which currently can attract duties up to 150%. So those are some of the demands from the UK side. As far as India is concerned, the UK is a very important partner in the IT services sector, the largest market for India in Europe, and which is why there was a concern that there may be a push from India's side when it comes to easier access to visas for Indian professionals in the UK, as well as students who form a major part of the education economy in the UK. But today in a joint press conference, the Indian side conveyed that nothing was a deal breaker and that the visa issue was not something that they would be focusing on. They would instead look at the mutual areas of benefit and hope to sign this deal very soon on the basis of that.
As New York grapples with another spike in COVID-19 cases, the city's restaurants are feeling the pinch. Eateries across the city are seeing a drop in demand as concerns over the Omicron variant grow. William Denslow has more from New York.
Luis Arsamota is looking for a slice of luck. There was a recent break-in at one of his restaurants, but it's a surge in COVID-19 cases that's really shaken business.
Week of Christmas, we lost 60% of our business. The week of New Year, it was almost the same. And in the first week of January, we went down all the way to 70%.
As a result, he's had to cut payroll by scaling back staff shifts and reducing the restaurant's hours of operation. The timing of this wave in infections has been especially tough on the city's restaurants.
As coronavirus cases rise in the city, more New Yorkers are opting to dine outdoors. Keeping staff and customers both safe and warm poses a twin challenge for restaurants.
Earlier in the pandemic, outdoor dining became a lifeline for more than 12,000 of the city's restaurants when indoor capacity restrictions were in place. Those limitations have been replaced with an indoor vaccine mandate, but the outdoor dining structures have remained. But providing customers with an enjoyable alfresco experience can be difficult during the winter months.
If it's going to be 20 degrees at night, we're not going to open the section. And we're just going to have to take the loss for that. And I think most people at this point aren't as willing to be uncomfortable anymore because they feel like the end of the pandemic might be nearing a little bit. So they'd rather just sit it out and order takeout anyway.
New York Mayor Eric Adams has joined other city leaders across the US calling on the federal government to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, created to assist bars and restaurants impacted by the pandemic.
We need to keep fighting.
We're a tough industry, but we also need support from government to ensure that as many of these businesses as possible and many of these jobs as possible are still here on the other side of this.
Clay Restaurant previously missed out on receiving money from the Restaurant Revitalisation Fund, and its operators aren't optimistic that there's appetite in Washington to provide more financial support. Instead, those here are hoping a decline in coronavirus cases and warmer weather in the months ahead will provide a more palatable outlook for the industry. William Denzelo, CGTN, New York.
Well, here's one that should give relief to your eyes. Making an onion soup from scratch or caramelized onions is about to get easier. A new variety of onion that doesn't make people cry is expected to be sold in select Waitrose stores from January the 18th in the UK. CGTN's Wanja Mugai has that story.
Cutting onions is usually accompanied by tears, but that could soon change with the introduction of Sanyons into the UK market. British retailer Waitrose is set to sell the new onions from January 18. However, shoppers will not be able to differentiate them from the standard onions.
It's a little bit of a paler skin, slightly flakier skin, so it's not quite that sort of deep brown that you would associate with a British onion. But apart from that, you know, size and shape and everything is what you'd normally expect from a standard onion. It's really all about both the taste and the and how much it makes you cry.
Sanyons were developed by the pharmaceutical company Bayer, but are not genetically modified. It took 24 years of crossbreeding carefully selected less pungent strains of onions and $5 million to make Sanyons.
The pyruvic acid level within an onion is used to measure the strength and the pungency of an onion. These onions are a lot lower than you would normally expect in a standard onion, which would probably be about 7 or 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, whereas these are coming in at around 3.
Sanyons are also less pungent. This is why the Sanyons that will hit the shelves in the UK from next week were harvested last July in Spain and stored since then to make sure that they wouldn't cause a single tear. For now, it's impossible to say whether Sanyons taste just like the real thing, but UK shoppers can soon find out for themselves. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Well, let's now take a look at the commodities market. That oil price continues to gain much interest. Earlier in trade today, Brent neared its highest intraday level in 7 years as the market tightened and global concerns about Omicron's impact eased. As the day progressed, the Brent slid slightly, shaving off a modest 0.3%. Do keep in mind, though, that just recently the International Energy Agency had said that the global consumption was turning out to be stronger than expected. So we could see that oil price either hold steady or continue its rally. Let's now take a short break. Here's what's coming up when we return. Startups in Nigeria help fight scourge of fake pharmaceutical drugs.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania. Africa Live. Find your voice.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, startups in Nigeria are helping fight counterfeit pharmaceutical drugs in Africa's most populous nation. The prevalence rate of fake drugs in the country is higher than the global average and contributes to the death of thousands of children and adults annually. CGTN's Beryl Ora has that story.
The prevalence rate of fake drugs in Nigeria is higher than the global average of 10%. So to fight the flood of fake pills, the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, in partnership with some startups, has created stickers with unique codes attached to boxes and sachets of pills. And consumers can then use apps on their phones to scan the code and confirm their authenticity.
The major problem of counterfeiting in Nigeria and Africa is as a result of broken supply chain processes. Right, you have several importers having the same license to import the same product. You know, it's very difficult, and then you probably now have different barcode numbers for the same products. You know, but probably the product is in different packaging.
In 2009, Biofem Industries discovered a counterfeit of their anti-diabetic prescription drug in the market, which caused a decline in their revenue. They began using the unstructured supplementary service data technology in 2011.
After the experience we had, and we were able to mitigate that experience using the technology, we decided that all our products was going to have it, so that we do not wait till when it is counterfeited before we protect the patient, which is primary to us.
Lagos-based Checkit Technologies and Sproxil Africa have empowered patients to check authenticity, and manufacturers are also able to see the number of new customers who have used their products.
What we discovered was that people don't necessarily scratch off labels on products, which is why we went off with the idea of, you know, putting more like an incentive on the sticker labels through a scratch verify win model, printing that exactly on the sticker label. So when the consumer sees the sticker label, over 60% of our labels get authenticated in the market.
The idea was, why don't you put the power in the hand of the product end user to be able to validate what he or she is buying at the point of purchase. So with that, first they note the shop where they bought it, and they can tell their family members, and no shop owner wants to be tagged as someone who sells counterfeit product.
Both Checkit and Proxil offer services in various countries in Africa and are working to build in marketing tools to boost authentication of products.
That has boosted the confidence of people in this. So modern technologies have really helped. So, but for that, people would go and imagine some of the drugs in time past that people will ingest without that technology. So the technology has really helped.
Nigeria, with a population of 200 million, has had fake and substandard pharmaceuticals influx in its market for decades. The national agency has, in the past 3 years, seized $4.8 billion worth of counterfeit drugs. Beryl Ora, CGTN.
In Forex trade, a stronger dollar weighed on major currencies we track on the continent. Even the strength we've been seeing in the oil market did little to boost Africa's largest oil producer's currency. Nigeria's naira slid almost 0.5%. Kenya's shilling almost held steady against the greenback. However, it too edged a tad into negative territory. South Africa's volatile rand lost 0.2%, while Egypt's pound also experienced a slight knock. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business. Remember that you can send your feedback to contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. From me, Hannah Viviers, and the rest of the Global Business team, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.